tell you the book we're going to read is a very small book. And if you like animals, especially dogs, you will like this story. It's entitled Lessons from a Sheepdog. I know some of you perhaps have read this and read it more than once, and this will be, I don't know, a second or third time through for me with this book, and it's been a few years. So I'm going to enjoy reading this again and hearing this story about the sheepdog, a sheepdog, and the spiritual lessons Phillip Keller has drawn from his experience with this sheepdog. The sheepdog's name is Lass. So here we go. This is a simple story about a special dog who shared life with me on my first sheep ranch. Though she bore the very ordinary name Lass, she was in fact a most extraordinary dog. My memories of her companionship, loyalty, and love linger across the years as colorful recollections. Even more important and precious, however, were the powerful spiritual principles God enabled me to learn through working with this beautiful border collie. Oh, it's not just a collie, it's a border collie. I forgot about that because one of the dogs Leon and I had, I think, was a border collie, and they are so lovely. I just love those dogs. My memories linger about this dog that Leon and I shared, a few decades ago. But anyway, here we go. More. Some of us are slow to grasp the basic truths of divine design. We cannot always clearly comprehend Christ's call to us in simple service, and for that reason, His gracious Spirit often uses the common experiences of life to shed the intense light of supernatural truth upon our path. It is the basic principle of using parables drawn from our workaday world to help us clearly understand the noble, wondrous purposes of our loving Father. This last did for me as a young man. I was only in my late 20s when she came into my life. There were searching, burning questions in my spirit then that no sermons or studies had ever resolved for me. Yet in His gracious, generous way, God used this dog to help me see what He Himself is like in character and conduct. He taught me emphatically what His highest purposes and best intentions were for me as His friend and co-worker. For He does make it very clear that as His people, He calls us to a special service with Himself. As a lad, I had grown up with cattle on our land in East Africa. My father had bred the finest of the breeds adapted to the tropics. His cattle were a special joy to him. The splendid bulls that sired our calves, the sturdy oxen that hauled our wagons and worked our fields, the handsome cows that produced our milk were a marvel to the Africans. When I came to North America to complete my university training in animal husbandry, cattle still played an important role in my career. I worked on various ranches and longed for the day when I would purchase my own spread and establish my own herd. By my mid-20s, I had been made manager of one of the most beautiful ranches in the interior cattle country of British Columbia. There I was given a magnificent, courageous cattle dog named Paddy. He was an excellent dog with cows and saved me hours of work in handling the stock. It was shortly after this that I found a piece of neglected ranch property in the southern tip of Vancouver Island. Because it was so abused, the place did not attract much attention, but I could see its potential. It was an estate sale, so cash had to be paid for the property. The net result was I had insufficient funds left to purchase cattle, so I was obliged to start with sheep. It quickly became obvious that dear old Patty was completely baffled and bewildered by sheep. In disgust and dismay, he began to resign himself to snoozing in the sun or sleeping by the fire. I realized that I faced a serious dilemma with my first flock. I simply had to find a sheep dog to help me handle the ewes and lambs that grazed on my impoverished pastures. My highest hope was to come across a well-bred border collie. For all the breeds, they were the finest sheep dogs. In passing, I might mention that during those initial months at Fairwinds, for that is what we called our spot by the sea, I began to wonder seriously why I had allowed myself to be stuck with sheep. Compared to cattle, they seemed stupid, timid, frail, vulnerable to diseases and parasites, and easy prey to predators. Little did I then comprehend the wondrous ways of God or his hand at work behind the scenes of my affairs. Little did I realize the enormous, eternal lessons he would teach me on those wind-blown acres where I struggled to make a beautiful country estate out of derelict land. One day there was a short announcement or advertisement in the city newspaper. It said, "Wanted. A good country home for a purebred border collie, chases cars and bicycles." I hurried up to a neighbor's ranch house and phoned the owner in town, some 27 miles away. "Yes," the lady replied, "I still have the dog. Please come quickly. No one else wants her." And she sounded desperate. In short order, I drove down the winding country road and pulled up outside a little cottage in the suburbs. The lady was waiting for me at the gate. Almost before I could get out of the car, she began to talk excitedly. "Mr. Keller, I can't do a thing with this creature. The dog is plumb crazy. She's loco." The woman threw her arms up in the air in dismay. "All she does is tear around after the kids, chase boys on bicycles, jump all the fences, and races after every car that comes down the road." "Please let me see her," I requested, trying to calm her excitement. "Maybe I can do something with her. I've had dogs all my life." She led me around to the back of the house. As we entered the little yard, a leaping bundle of dog flung herself at me. She snarled and snapped, then collapsed in a heap on the ground. Instantly, to my shock and horror, I saw the dog was not only chained from her collar to a steel post, but also she was hobbled by a second chain from her neck to her back leg. Oh, what a pitiful spectacle! Crouched in the dirt, she glared at me. Her ears were laid back in anger. Deep, guttural, menacing growls rumbled in her throat. "How old is she?" I asked. And what is her name? Trying to cover up the profound pity and love that welled up in me. Oh, the owner replied that the dog was 2 years old and her name was Lassie. I looked at the border collie with mingled emotions. She was a dog gone wrong, almost beyond hope or help. Yet somehow I saw beyond this. I saw in her keen intelligence and a great capacity to learn. She had a splendid constitution with deep, wide chest, broad back, strong legs. The master breeders had done a magnificent job in producing such a splendid spectacle. At 2 years of age, most dogs have learned all they will ever know, I remarked to the lady. But she's too beautiful, I said, to destroy. I'm prepared to give her another chance to change. The owner was still tense, waiting for my next words. I'll take her home with me to my ranch on one condition, I said, and I weighed every word carefully. If I cannot do a thing with her after 6 weeks, I will bring her back to you. She's too lovely a specimen for me to put her away. You must do it. The lady gladly agreed to my proposition, so I unhobbled Lass. From now on, that would be her name. I led her out to my car and put her behind the front seat for the long ride home. All the way I talked to her reassuringly in a gentle voice. All I got in response were low growls. Occasionally I would try to put my hand back to touch or pet her, but she would bare her teeth and snap angrily. Reaching the ranch, I felt a peculiar inner assurance that somehow this torn and twisted dog would be redeemed. Our land lay at the very end of the country road, where it ran into the sea. There were virtually no cars to chase, no boys on bicycles to tempt her, just the wide rolling pastures and the rugged shoreline where ocean waves thundered against the land. Most importantly, there was a new master. Lass was given a kennel with fresh, clean bedding. She had a bowl of sparkling water and a dish heaped with food. She would touch none of it. Every advance made to touch her was rejected. Any attempts to call her were resisted belligerently. Day followed day. She was beginning to lose condition, and I even began to fear she might die. In an act of faltering faith, I settled on a daring step. I decided to set her totally free. The instant I did so, she fled into the forest behind our cottage. In a matter of moments, she had disappeared from view, and I wondered if I would ever see her again. That reminds me, our dog we named Flash because when Leon brought her newly home and let go of her, she was gone in a flash. And we hunted for days for her. Finally, a neighbor said, "Oh, she's down in the field over there. I saw her." And we rescued her. But in a flash, she was gone, and this dog was gone too. For several days I drove up and down the road looking for her, asking other ranchers in the area to let me know if they saw her, but there was no sign anywhere. It was as if she had simply vanished into the ocean air. Then one evening, I happened to glance up at the top of a large rock outcrop behind our home. There on the summit, Lass lay crouched like a hunted cougar looking down at me. I called her name, but she turned and fled. That evening, I took food and water and placed them on the rock for her. At dawn, they were gone. I fed her regularly, but there was no response to any of the overtures I made to her. A couple of weeks later, a small band of sheep grazed near her lookout. I noticed she took a keen interest in them. She would cock her head and rise on her haunches and watch them intently. Her latent instincts were coming to life. So, evening after evening, I brought up a few ewes and lambs to graze near her. During this time, no intimate rapport had been established between us. I felt an enormous compassion for this beautiful dog. An intense longing permeated my whole being for her to come to me, to get to know me, to trust me, to learn to love me, to work with me, to be my friend. Yet week was following week, and the time was approaching when she might have to be destroyed. It was an appalling alternative that filled me with dismay. Then one evening the sun was setting in a golden haze over the ocean. The sheep were grazing contentedly at the water's edge. I stood entranced, my hands clasped behind my back, caught up in the wonder of it all. Suddenly, I felt a soft, warm nose touch my hands. Lass had come. My heart seemed to stop with ecstasy. Contact had been made. She had found the fortitude to let me touch her life. It was the turning point in our association. Lass discovered that she had a new master whom she could trust entirely. She had come into the care of one who really loved her, who understood her, who had only her best interests in mind. She also began to realize that not only did I understand her, but I also knew all about sheep, ranching, and the exciting part she could play in the whole operation. On the basis of our mutual affection and trust, I began to teach her the commands so essential for success. Because of her alert mind and fine intelligence, she learned very quickly. The familiar phrases and orders, such as come, lie down, sit, fetch them, stay, to the left, to the right, were readily understood and soon obeyed. From voice commands, we gradually progressed to silent hand commands, so that even if she was a great distance from me, she understood what to do. She would watch the movement of my right hand and arm, so she became able to handle the sheep with remarkable skill. One of the truly touching aspects of our deepening friendship was her utter devotion to me. Where before she had been shy, distant, antagonistic, now she became my virtual shadow. Where I went, she went. My presence was her peace and her pleasure. She became essentially a one-man dog. She would eat and drink only what I provided. She was mine and mine alone. Strange as it may seem, the most difficult command for her to obey was stay. Sometimes it meant she would have to hold a bunch of lambs in the corner of a field, or guard a gate, or keep watch over some unruly rams while I was doing another job. It was very trying for her to have me disappear from view. She was eager to be where the action was. She would sometimes be sorely tempted to break faith and take off on other tempting escapades. Two of these were somewhat amusing, yet also posed serious problems if we were in the midst of handling the flock. The first was the colony of crows that had their rookery in the trees of a small rocky island just offshore. The black rascals would come winging in over our fields, then swoop down low over Lass to taunt and tease her. Unable to restrain herself, she would leap to her feet and race away after the tormentors. She seemed literally to fly over the fields, her graceful body appearing almost airborne. It was a spectacular show, but it did neither the sheep, the ranch, or her master one particle of good. The second cause of her discomfiture were the great land-clearing fires we had in the winter. Sometimes the flaming sparks and glowing cinders carried up and away in the wind were so exciting she would go leaping and bounding after them. Occasionally she would catch in her long lustrous coat one of them and begin to burn with a terrible odor. Lass would roll wildly in the grass, then shaking herself come racing back to me as if to say, "Well, boss, wasn't that a grand display?" And yes, it was, but it had only wasted her energies, sapped her strength, and caused her to break faith. She could quickly sense that I was disappointed. She knew at once when a coolness came between us because of her misconduct. She would have to be corrected for her failure to be faithful in the line of duty. These were difficult moments for both of us, but they were absolutely essential for her well-being and mine. The operation of the ranch and our success with the sheep depended in large measure upon her implicit obedience. When the discipline was done, I would gather Lass up in my arms. I would caress her head, rub her chest, and whisper in her ear, "It's all over, girl." Her eyes would shine again. There was total reconciliation and restoration. In pure pleasure, she would leap out of my arms, race around on the grass in a wide circle, and come leaping back into my arms. Perhaps the most powerful memory that lingers with me about this delightful dog was her increasing willingness to do anything I asked of her. She was totally, instantly available for any task, no matter how tough or trying. On the ranch we had some rather rugged, rough, cut-over country. The sheep would scatter out in this difficult terrain of rock outcroppings, wild rose thickets, downed timber, and windfalls. They were searching for special sweet mouthfuls of grass and leaves not grazed upon before. Because of my height, I could always see where the lambs and ewes were in the broken country, but Lass could not. I would have to send her into these tough spots to round up and bring out the entire flock. For her, it was virtually going in blind, trusting me implicitly. "Bring them in, Lass, bring them in," I would command her. "Don't leave a single stray behind." And she would go, bounding away over the rocks, through the windfalls, into the rose thickets. Often when she finally came out with all the flock, her face would be scratched, Her fur would be clogged with burrs, her feet would be cut and torn, but she had obeyed. Never mind the suffering endured. Because of such devotion and faithful service, trust and affection were built between us. Looking back across those precious years at Fairwinds, I was learning from Lass what it was that Christ, my great shepherd, wanted to do with me in his field as his co-worker. As the owner of Fairwinds, I quickly realized I would need help to run the ranch and handle the flock efficiently. That assistance had to come from a faithful, loyal border collie, bred and disciplined for this unique work. Though I was an energetic young man, I simply could not round up the sheep alone. The flock often scattered and fled in 5 directions. No matter how fast I ran or how loud I shouted, the sheep still strayed in their own stubborn way. So I was obliged to find a co-worker, an under-shepherd, in a sheepdog who would carry out my will in managing the flock. Working together in harmony, one good sheepdog and myself could accomplish as much as 5 men. The same precise principle holds true in God's dealing with men and women. The Lord called himself the Good Shepherd. He pictured himself for us as the one who had come to care for the lost sheep. He carefully instructed his disciples to be his co-laborers and fed and tended his co-laborers to be his co-laborers and feed and tend his ewes and lambs. After his resurrection, Jesus met his young friends beside the Lake of Galilee, and there prepared for them a breakfast of fish and bread. When the meal was over, he turned to Peter, asking him 3 times, "Peter, do you really love me? Are you really my friend?" When the burly young man assured the master of his loyalty and love, Jesus responded 3 times by saying, "Peter, feed my lambs. Peter, feed my sheep. Peter, feed my sheep." This was the special labor, the unique work to which he was assigned. It has been well said that God has no hands in the world but our hands. He has no feet here but our feet. He has no lips but our lips. This is stating the rather obvious case that our Father chooses to carry on his purposes through the fallible agency of common people. He can and does break through into human affairs in supernatural ways, yet in the main he chooses to use us, ordinary people, to accomplish his grand designs. Seen in this dimension, we begin to perceive the enormous honor he bestows on those chosen to become his co-workers. Very often, as in my first encounter with Lass, he finds us cast in the wrong role, caught in the toils of our own intransigence, abused and misused by the wrong hands of an uncaring master. This truth struck me with tremendous impact the day I drove up to the lady's gate and heard her rant and rave about her crazy collie. She had no inkling of how to handle such a beautiful creature, bred for special service, nor did she seem to care that all the potential locked up in this animal had gone wrong. It was a profound portrait of so many of us, for in the dusty dog hobbled with chains, I saw portrayed the plight of men and women who, originally destined for noble service, have fallen into the wrong hands. Now they grovelled in the despair of wasted, misspent years. The skilled master breeders of the border counties in Britain had produced sheepdogs of acute intelligence and enormous energy. A beautiful specimen like lass carried within her the capacity for outstanding work. She had to be in the right hands. She had to come into the care of the Good Shepherd. She had to have her old habits broken and her instincts channeled into the purposes for which she had been bred. The same principle holds true for us. We have been created in the generous sovereignty of God to achieve great things with Him. He endows us with the capacity to carry out His will and to do His work in the world as we work together under His care. It is His intention that we should touch lives, enrich spirits, and bring souls into His care and management. For this to happen, we must be loosed from the tyranny of the wrong owner. We must be released from servitude to sin, to self, and to our slave master, Satan. This implies, of course, that a person is unshackled from one owner to be brought under the management of another. There is no such thing as absolute freedom, for even though human beings are free agents, they must come under the control of forces and influences greater than themselves. Often young people boast of being free to do as they wish, to go wherever they will, or become whatever they choose. This is only partially true. For though they may not realize it, their decisions, their behavior, their lifestyle are not those of their own free will. Rather, they are conditioned, shaped, and directed by the hands that govern them. Unfortunately, Lass had fallen into the wrong hands. Under the mishandling of the wrong owner, her talent had been twisted and subverted for destructive ends. Her vitality and instincts were being wasted on chasing boys and bicycles. Her capacity for worthwhile work was expended on the empty pursuit of cars. The upshot was, day by day, she herself unwittingly was forging the shackles of steel that bound her, and we do exactly the same. Jesus stated categorically, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. Revised Version, John 8:24. Revised Standard Version. Those who brag about being free seldom realize they are bound by their own destructive lifestyles. They are trapped in the toils of their own destructive decisions and desires. Nor can they be loosed except by the loving hands of the good Savior. As I approached Lass, on the day that I found her in such a forlorn state, she met me with blazing eyes, low growls, and bared teeth. She did not want me to touch her. She trembled at the tone of my unfamiliar voice. This was not surprising. She had been misused, abused, twisted, and torn in spirit. How or why would she trust anyone? And this is precisely the same with us. When first the great shepherd comes to us with outstretched hands, we resist his approach. We resent his voice calling us. We recoil in fear from his overtures of goodwill. Doubts and misgivings surge through our minds. We cringe from his coming. Our wills are set in stern resistance. We are convinced we will suffer abuse at his hands. But it is only the hand of God that sets us free. It is his strong hands that can train us to move in new directions. It is his gentle yet strong hands which can handle us with skill and love and strength. It is his hands which can change our character, alter our conduct, and send us out to do great and noble service. The first owner Lass had did not understand dogs. She did not care about the lofty capabilities of this beautiful creature. She wanted only to get rid of Lass as quickly as she could. Few of us think seriously about the sinister and subversive character of Satan. To many people, he is almost less than real, sometimes supposed to be nothing more than a superstitious phantom or a product of man's imagination. The terrible truth is, he is very real, very active, and exceedingly deceptive. While appearing to give us liberty by allowing us to do whatever we wish in response to our own inherent selfishness or sin, he watches us enslave and destroy ourselves. Ultimately, in the case of Lass, unless a new owner had intervened, she would have been destroyed. Happily, that did not happen. A stranger showed up in her backyard that day. His coming would change the entire tenor of her life. This one who came saw beyond the dirt and dust that clogged her mottled coat. He saw the magnificent head, the strong constitution, the beautiful body so well proportioned. He knew the powerful potential for good locked within this tormented creature. So, bravely, boldly, I unshackled her chains, unhobbled her legs. I put my own soft collar upon her and took her home. She had passed from one set of hands into another. At first it was terrifying, but one day she would know it was all very wonderful. Many of us have been under the wrong management, in the wrong hands. We have been so mishandled that all of the original superb purposes for which we were created have been distorted. We are virtual slaves to sin, to ourselves, and to Satan. Yet the stranger of Galilee comes into our lives. He looks upon us with love and sees beyond our sins. He extends his knowing hands to take us into his care. We are not always keen to go. Life under the old master has made us suspicious. In our human ignorance, we are convinced that to come into Christ's care can be even worse bondage than before. As I put Lass into my old car and started down the road to Fairwinds, she was sure something terrible was about to happen. She crouched on the floor behind my seat, trembling and tense with apprehension. It would take weeks and months for Lass to fully discover that her new master only had her best interests at heart. It takes some of us a lifetime to learn that Christ, our Good Shepherd, knows exactly what he is doing with us. He understands us perfectly. He manages us with incredible wisdom and loving skill, both for our benefit and his. Bless his name. We'll start the next chapter. Long before I brought Lass home to stay with us, I had painstakingly prepared a new kennel for the special dog that would share our life at Fairwinds. In my mind's eye, I had pictured a border collie that would work with me on the ranch, share in the care of the sheep, and become a virtual member of our family. It was a new leash as well. There was a new leash as well. There were also clean dishes to hold fresh food and water. Everything was in readiness for the dog chosen to be my companion and co-worker. There was so much at stake in this selection. The successful operation of the ranch depended on a good dog. The skillful handling of the sheep was bound up in the creature's capacity to work obediently. My own contentment in managing the flocks rested in her responsiveness to my commands. All of these hopes, dreams, and aspirations moved through my mind, as I drove home with Lass in the car. At last we pulled up to our gate. Gently I opened it, then drove to our rustic cottage perched on a rise of ground overlooking the sea. Here, in our country setting, all was tranquil, only the wind in the trees, the tide running against the rocks, the gulls and crows wheeling and crying in the breeze above the shore broke the silence. There would be no boys racing on bicycles, no cars roaring up the road, no traffic din or city noises to distract or disturb. Lass was coming into a new setting of quiet serenity. She was entering the life of a brand new master. What would she do? Her initial reaction was to slink away, crouched low in the grass, in commingled fear and foreboding. Had she not been on a long leash, she would have fled into the nearby forest behind our home. Speaking to her softly, petting her gently, I led her to the kennel standing in the shade of a lovely oak. She simply stared at it, refused to enter, and stubbornly crouched at the entrance, staring up at me with defiant eyes. My wife, thrilled and excited by the beautiful dog, brought out a heaping bowl of food. I fetched another dish full of water for her. She ignored both of our offerings. She refused to touch either food or drink. This went on day after day. I was utterly dismayed. There was no sign of positive response. Her form became gaunt and wasted as day followed day. And in a bold and desperate act, I did unleash her and set her free. In a flash, she was gone. I know we've read this, but this is a new chapter, and he's repeating himself, so we're reading. In a flash she was gone. Like a fleeing phantom, she vanished into the woods. I wondered if ever I would see her again. I drove up and down our country road in hope of finding her. I called at neighboring ranches. I combed our fields and ocean edge, but no sign of Lass. In the anguish of my search, I began to understand a little of the sorrow God endures. amid all his endeavors to draw us to him. Again and again we refuse his benefits he offers to us. Belligerently we rebuff his love and concern. Yet, in spite of our indifference and unyielding resistance, I had an enormous empathy for the dog. I longed to redeem her. I was consumed with a desire to make her into a loving, loyal companion. I yearned to see her rise to the potential that lay dormant in her. All of these hopes seemed dashed into dust until one evening I looked up onto the edge of a rough rock outcrop behind the cottage, and there she was. I decided to take food and water up to her lookout. Every morning it was gone, and yet every evening she'd be back. Every time I approached her, called her name, or whistled, she vanished, spirited away like smoke whisked away in the wind. I began to wonder if this distant dog would ever become truly mine. She did not mind eating the food set out for her. She drank the water poured out for her. She relished the total freedom she had. But she wasn't mine, nor was I hers. Caught up in this standoff, the gracious Spirit of God brought home to my heart with great clarity the predicament in which people put themselves before God. The Master comes to us in our plight. He offers to take us into his family. He spares no pains to provide all that is necessary for our welfare and contentment. He speaks to us reassuringly. He calls us by name. He sets us totally free. Yet the personal response of most people is to recoil from him. They resent his approach. They refuse to respond to his overtures of compassion. They flee to escape from his hands. The paradox in this belligerent behavior is that at the same time, they don't mind taking advantage of Christ's benefits, but at the moment and place of their own choosing, in their own self-willed way. God in Christ has come to set people free. He has placed before them the benefits and delights of belonging to his family. He has made available to them his love, his care, his provisions in generous measure. In spite of this, their liberty and freedom is used for selfish ends. They insist on doing their own thing in their own way at their own time. They are not under the Master's control. All the good of which they are capable comes to nothing. One night a few ewes and lambs grazed up near the rock where Lass would lay. I saw her sit up, cock her head, and watch them with great intensity. Perhaps her latent instincts to shepherd sheep were coming to life. Each evening, when the day's chores were done, I would direct a few sheep toward her, hoping this might somehow help to establish contact between us. But nothing seemed to elicit her positive response. I began to wonder if all my overtures of love were in vain. The dark prospect that she might have to be destroyed loomed ever larger. This was the most poignant lesson I learned from Lass. It was she who eventually must make the decision whether or not she would come to me, entrust her life to my care, allow me to control her conduct. At this point in my own walk with God, I had been bewildered by the conflicting views and highly divergent doctrines debated within Christendom. Discussions on the absolute sovereignty of God as held by the extreme Calvinists and the grave responsibility of man as taught by the Armenians had always dismayed me. For in the final analysis, the issue always arises as to the ultimate end of man. Does he decide his own destiny? Does he determine his own destruction? Does he discover that hell or heaven are his own choice, not God's? In my agonizing approaches and appeals to Lass, I saw with intense clarity that both views were correct, complementary, and reconciled within the response of the individual's will. As her new master, I had done everything I could within my power and sovereign love for her. Now she, in response to my compassion, would have to choose to come to me of her own free will, yet ever drawn by my overtures of affection and concern. The last thing in the world I wanted was to have this dog destroyed. Just the thought grieved me. I cringed from the very prospect of losing this lovely creature. God's word is very clear in this whole matter. He does not condemn us. He does not desire to destroy us. We ourselves choose what our end shall be. We are free to follow our own feeble ways, or we are free to follow him who came to deliver us from the despair of our own dilemma. It was with such truths surging through my spirit that I would go out at twilight to try and draw this irascible creature to myself. Steadily my hopes, however, grew dimmer. The crucial hour of final reckoning was just around the corner. My spirit would not always strive with Lass. Her prospects were fading. And that's where we'll have to close now. It starts about a summer evening, and we'll pick up, Lord willing, next Monday evening to see what he has to say about that summer evening. Here we go. Let's get started. It will be obvious by now that the mutual affection established between Lass and myself was very precious to both of us. It seemed to me at times that our intimate relationship, pardon me, was more than merely a man and dog, more than a shepherd and his sheep dog, even than efficient co-workers. We had become special friends. And here you can see a picture of a border collie on the cover of this book. And I got to thinking it wasn't a border collie I mentioned we had, it was a Shetland sheepdog. Sort of like a collie, but nevertheless, that I was mistaken. But here we go. With her keen perception, sensitive instincts, and acute intelligence, Lass had a capacity not only to understand my commands, but even to anticipate my wishes. It was this unusual awareness that made her such a remarkable worker. Because of this harmonious cooperation between us, the livestock operation prospered and flourished. The sheep were handled efficiently and with a minimum of disturbance. My own work was made much easier and more joyous. Lass herself was a totally fulfilled companion who reveled in all her responsibilities. I sometimes thought of our overall relationship as a triad of triumph between master, friend, and flock, all of it possible because of the loving cooperation of a border collie. Reflecting on this happy association we enjoyed at Fairwinds, I have often thought this is precisely the relationship Christ desires with us. More than anything, he wants me to be his companion, his co worker, his friend in helping to tend the flock. This is really the essence of that final discourse he shared with his 11 disciples before his death. It is recorded for us in great detail by John in his Gospel, chapters 14 to 17. Any person who wishes to grasp the true meaning of love for God should read and meditate over those superb insights. Love for the Master is not some sentimental emotion that sweeps over the soul in moments of special piety. Love for Christ is a deliberate setting of the will to carry out his commands at any cost. It is the delight of accomplishing our Father's highest purposes, no matter how challenging. The end result of such conduct is to bring sweet satisfaction to the Good Shepherd. Because of such single minded service, we sense his approval of our behavior. We know of a surety that we are loved and appreciated, and the ultimate end is that others benefit, others are blessed, others are cared for. Jesus himself put it this way: "This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Ye are my friends, if ye do whatsoever I command you." That's John 15:12 through 14. It should be pointed out emphatically that to lay down one's life for another means to put the interests and wishes of others ahead of our own. It implies that to obey Christ and carry out his intentions is more desirable than doing my own thing. It is one thing to put this down with pen and paper, but it is the toughest lesson any of us can learn to live out in our daily lives. It simply is not natural for most of us to love God or love others in the dramatic discipline of a laid down life. We are a selfish, self serving people. We have the strange worldly idea that to be of lowly service is to be used or abused. Yet God in Christ came among us in lowly service. He came to minister to us, to give himself to us. And so, because he first loved us, we in turn are willing and ready to love him and others. As the years went by at Fairwinds, I saw in ever increasing clarity what Jesus meant when he spoke of his love for us and our love for him. I began to understand the true implications and demands of a laid down life. Continuously, I was giving myself to Lass. I gave her my strength, my attention, my affection, my loyalty, my friendship, my very life. She, in turn, reciprocated this outpouring by giving back to me her vitality, her vigor, her enthusiasm, her cooperation, her love, and her loyalty. Together, all the benefits of this relationship were then poured out upon the flock. Our mutual energies and expertise were spent in caring for the sheep. It would be wonderful if this sheepdog story could end here on this noble note, but it cannot. For, to be true to the tale, there were some disappointing interludes. There were times on which Lass did break faith. There were days when she did not stay steadfast. There were many distractions that came along, which drew her away from her line of duty. Love, so betrayed, demands discipline to be restored. There were grievous interludes for me, for her, and for the flock. To correct her and to mend the breach between us, there had to be discipline. This was not easy or pleasant, but it was absolutely essential. I loved Lass far too much to let her revert back to her old wretched lifestyle. I was too fond of her to allow her to waste her energies for naught. She was made for great things, intended for loyal service, so both of us would have to suffer to set her straight. If there is to be mutual trust, integrity, and loyalty again, then it must involve some suffering for us to learn this lesson. And it was not easy to punish Lass. After all, she was my friend. It demanded self-discipline on my part to insist that she perform properly, up to her full potential. To correct her conduct with stern words or a severe reprimand or even a sharp slap made her draw back, and with reproach her bright eyes would fill with foreboding. She would lay back her ears with remorse and crouch low, her tail drawn between her legs. For a few moments there was a distinct coolness between us. She knew full well she had failed, and she knew I was far from satisfied with her performance. I never allowed these interludes of discipline to last long. Correction came swiftly, it came surely, yet it was over in short order. Then I would call her to me quietly. I would speak to her softly in reassuring tones. Lass, it's all over. I would hold her close, rub her chest, run my hands over her head. We're friends. All is well. And her eyes would begin to sparkle as she looked into my face. Sometimes she would reach out to lick my cheek with her tongue. Her body would quiver and she would begin to move her tail with pleasure. For me, the entire area of God's discipline of my personal life was best learned from Lass. Through such examples, I came to understand implicitly what my Master's intentions are for me during those times when He corrects my conduct. As the Spirit of God makes abundantly clear in Hebrews 12:6-11, for whom the Lord loveth, He chasteneth. Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. For years has been prominent in the church an unbalanced overemphasis upon the love of God. There has been a universal tendency to teach that Christ is so compassionate, so kind, that he does not discipline us for wrongdoing. There is the false impression that any old thing can go on, that God will simply forgive and forget all about it. This simply is not so. There is a price to pay for our perverseness. There is a discipline we deserve for wrongdoing. There is the Master's demand that we be faithful in service, serious in our responsibilities to Him and others. When Peter betrayed his Master the night before his crucifixion, it took one searching look to shatter the man's soul. He went out in darkness to break down in tears and remorse. In burning shame he was reduced from a tough, cursing fellow to a soul-shattered penitent. Yet this was the man so swiftly restored after the Master's resurrection. He was the servant spoken to with such reassurance beside the lake. Peter, do you love me? then feed my sheep. 3 times over, in a triad of tenderness, the bonds of trust, love, and loyalty were reestablished between Jesus and his friend. Like Lass, we shrink back from the discipline of God. We find it grievous. We would rather it was set aside. But it cannot be. It is for our best. It is for his benefit. It is for the eventual blessing of others whose lives we touch. And when it is all over, the bonds of affection between Christ and ourselves are even stronger than before. For instinctively, deep within our own spirits, we know we deserve discipline. We know the Master would not be true to himself or to us if he simply let our misconduct slide into sinister selfishness. He disciplines because he cares, because he loves, because he heals. With this reassurance comes renewed joy. There is total restoration. There is sheer delight in once again doing his bidding. Perhaps the most unforgettable lesson I learned from Lass can be best summed up in 3 words: available for anything. The realization that though she was only a dog, she exhibited this remarkable trait in all our years together was tremendously challenging. In this story, I have tried to convey some of the love, loyalty, and excitement we shared as master and friend. Yet all these varied experiences, of them all, it was ultimately Lass who taught me best what it really means to be utterly abandoned to the Master's purposes. She showed me in her loving devotion what it costs to be always available for anything that needed to be done in the interest of the ranch and the flock. This principle is best understood by recounting 2 entirely different types of duty she was expected to carry out. The first had to do with gathering up the counting sheep. Because of the very character of sheep, their helplessness, susceptibility to disease, and vulnerability to predators, they must be ever under the owner's constant scrutiny. By far the surest way to make certain all is well is for the sheepman to take count every day. In this way he knows at once if every sheep is free from harm. I can recall the sense of foreboding that would sweep over me whenever I went into the pasture and found that one or several of the ewes or lambs was missing. I can still sense the despair that flooded over me when I came out in the morning to discover that either a cougar or stray dogs had wrought havoc among the flock during the night. Dead sheep or torn lambs would lay strewn in the fields, and only an accurate count would determine the devastating losses. On other occasions, when the flock were fat, and flourishing on the fallen acorns, it was quite common for the choicest ewes to become cast, unable to get back up on their feet. They would soon die unless I found them in time to turn them over. It was always an ominous sign when the dark-winged buzzards wheeled in the sky above our terrain. Immediately I knew they were watching for a hapless sheep that might soon provide them with a banquet of its carcass. I would call Lass. "Well, girl, we'll have to gather up the sheep today," and she would race to my side, eager to go anywhere, any time. Some of our land lay in beautiful open fields, with occasional clumps of trees scattered over it like a lovely English park. Other parts were wild and rough, especially along the shoreline. Some of this was rocky with great granite outcroppings. Among the boulders there were patches of wild roses, thorny blackberry tangles, old stumps, and downed timber. The sheep loved to work their way into these spots, searching for stray patches of sweet grass or other dainty herbs they relished. It was no easy thing to find all the flock is such in such difficult cut over country, but this was an important part of the work entrusted to Lass. I would send her to fetch out every straggling stray ewe and lamb. Fetch them in, Lass, I would command her. Go out and bring them home. Without hesitating an instant, she would be gone, pushing through the undergrowth, running over the rough rocks. It was stimulating to watch her work with such enthusiasm. She flung herself into the task until every sheep was brought out. There was a cost to the dog in all of this. She would become very weary. Her face would be scratched and torn by the thickets. Her coat would be clogged with burrs and debris. Sometimes the pads of her feet would be lacerated with the sharp stones. Yet she went gladly, with happy abandon. She knew I knew what I was doing, and all she desired was to be a dynamic part of the whole project. Not once did she hesitate to hurl herself into the toughest tangle to gather up the flock. Her selfless abandonment to my wishes made an enormous impact upon me. In quiet moments of reverie, I would ask myself the soul searching questions: am I this available to my master? Am I as willing to fling myself into his work? Am I so devoted to him? Does the matter of suffering deter me from duty? More often than not, Lass put me to shame. Reflecting upon all of this, I began to see why it is that Christ calls us as his co-workers to go into tough places. Being his friend is no cozy guarantee that life will always be either easy or even agreeable. There are simply bound to be some tough assignments, some suffering, if we are to fully comply with his commands. I never sent Lass into hard places to hurt her, but I put her into challenging circumstances to save the sheep. And it was out of all these endeavors together that she gradually matured and developed into a magnificent worker. All of us, as God's people, seem to shrink back from suffering. We are so often reluctant to undertake even the smallest assignment for the Master. We are reluctant to share our strength, time, or talents to touch others in need or in trouble. We draw back from the distasteful situation where we might have to suffer a bit in order that others might be saved. I saw all of this vividly as I worked with Lass. Her shining spirit and eager abandonment to my wishes combined to form a highly polished mirror in which I clearly saw reflected all the flaws of my own character, the failings of my own conduct toward Christ. God's gracious Spirit used the hearty service of this beautiful collie to break some of my own tough resistance to his will for me. If she could be so instantly available for anything, surely I could do as well for God. Many of us fail to realize what a noble honor it is to be called the friend of God. We are not often shown what a stirring challenge it is to be called to suffer with Him. We do not seem to see that amid all the varied vicissitudes of life, He really does know what He is doing with us. He can grasp the whole scheme of things and see far beyond our finite view. He is utterly in command and control of every situation. Then let us trust Him fully. Let us follow Him fearlessly. Let us fling ourselves with glad abandon into His enterprises. This last did for me. Even in the darkest night and most dangerous engagements, this was the second way in which she proved her loyalty. As the years went by at Fairwinds, our happy times together were interspersed with challenging events that demanded extra determination for us to survive. The most frequent were attacks from both cougars and stray dogs at night. We lived close to wild country where there were forested hills and wilderness terrain. From time to time, the cunning panthers would come out of the dense forest and raid the flock. To warn us of the predator's stealthy approach at night, I put bells on the sheep. If the sheep were startled in the dark, they would leap to their feet and flee for their lives. The wild tinkle of the bells awakened me from sleep. I would leap out of bed, grab my flashlight, take the well-worn 303 rifle that stood by the door, and dash out into the fields. One never knew whether the sheep were being molested by stray dogs, cougars, or rustlers. For where we lived, most of the ranchers kept sheep, and rustling had become quite common in our part of the country. Men in trucks would back up to a fence, cut the wire to make a wide opening, then send their trained dogs into the pastures to round up a bunch of sheep, driving them right into the truck to be hauled away. As I left the house in the dark, Lass would be instantly at my side. No need to even call her. With experience, she too had learned to listen for the alarmed jangle of sheep bells ringing when the flocks fled. Leaping joyously beside me, she would bound up in the dark, lick my hand as if to say, "Cheer up, boss. This is a great adventure." So off we would go, side by side, to see what the danger was. It always surprised me how quickly the sheep sensed that we had come to protect them. They would soon start to relax and graze quietly again, or even lie down peacefully in the pastures. Yet in all of this, there was real danger for both Lass and myself. Rustlers were not averse to shooting the rancher's dog, nor were marauding dogs slow to attack another strange dog in the dark. Even the presence of a panther on the prowl was enough to make us doubly alert to any danger. But Lass seemed to revel in this excitement. Not once did I ever see her cringe from our night forays in fear. Never did she decide she would rather stay home in the comfort of her kennel. Some nights she and I would actually spend the entire night keeping watch in the fields. I would rest quietly on the grass, the rifle over my knees. She would lie crouched on guard beside me. Her head often rested on my lap, but her eyes never closed. Her ears were ever alert for the faintest strange sound. If anything aroused her, a deep growl would rumble in her chest, and I would be ready with the rifle. These were intimate interludes for both of us. We were in this thing together. It was the tough way to meet a tough challenge, but we simply had to be on our guard. Because of it, we were able to keep the sheep from danger and protect them from their predators. The Lord used Lass to teach me still another truth about Himself in the dark and difficult episodes in life. He's always there. He is fully alert and aware of the dangers abroad. He spares Himself no pains to protect us from those who would imperil our lives. It is well to remind ourselves often of the utter faithfulness of God. We are too prone to believe that He really is not with us, that He does not know what dangers confront us, that He is out of touch with things. Lass helped me to understand that it is often in the darkest hour, during the pressing danger, that the Master is closest to us. He cares, and He cares profoundly. It is His presence which gives us peace. It is His nearness which gives us hope. It is His protection which gives us life. Amid this, He enjoys our company. He loves to have us along. He too finds consolation in the eager, alert watchfulness of His friends. In the midst of our danger, there is delight. We need not be alarmed or anxious. He is here. All is well between us. Bless His wondrous name. And that ends our little book on man's best friend, a dog. And this is a sheepdog. So we're done with that little book. Father, we come to you as the great shepherd, the good shepherd, the shepherd that has sought the lost sheep, and all of us have been lost at one time or another. I can almost guarantee that. So we're thankful, Lord. We're so thankful, Father, and thankful to Jesus that we are in your flock. And I pray that you will help us to be steadfast and faithful and loving and willing to do your will, whatever it might be and wherever it might be. And we think of Arlene in the ER now, and Winnie. We pray that you will give special wisdom to the caregivers there, that to the physician or physician assistant who's taking care and deciding what needs to be done for Sister Arlene. Please bless this process. Please give Winnie wisdom also, but most of all, may your peace reign in each of their hearts, and bring Sister Arlene and Sister Winnie home this evening, if it be your will. If there is nothing serious going on, we pray for healing for Sister Winnie, for Sister Arlene, and wisdom for Sister Winnie as she cares for her. And please be with the Waldensian Center. We ask um, that you will protect the center, that you will protect the people that are there, and give them freedom from harm and danger because of this nearby erupting volcano. So please bless them. Surround them with your angels. Surround us. Keep us safe from harm and danger also. Although most of us are not in such a terrible way as being close to a volcano or being in the ER. So help us, Father, to be thankful for all that you've done for us. Please give us of the willingness to serve you 24/7. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Good night. And until we meet again, may God be with you and bless you. Bye for now.